Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tate,
I'm Raymond Peterson.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And I'm Alan Singer.
educator, historian, Dr. Alan Singer, a regular on Media Watch. Happy to have you with us, Dr. Singer. We're doing this the Wednesday before what would be our normal Monday airing on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Hopefully, it'll show up there next Monday. And what is today's date?
The
June
4th, June 4th, I
4th,
believe.
Wednesday,
Yep.
June 4th, being brought to you by the good graces of EVT Educational Productions, Zoom's capabilities, and I guess we'll put it up on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever. We'll let you know. We're going to follow up on the previous show because after we finish wrapping that show, we mentioned the Heritage Foundation Esther Project that was vilifying anybody who was pro-Palestinian. Um, Two young Jewish staffers at one of the embassy in Washington, D.C. were gunned down by someone irate about the fact that the Palestinians were in need of being free, or whatever they yelled. He yelled when he shot those young people. And lo and behold, the 1st of June out in Boulder, Colorado, somebody else with a flamethrower and Molotov cocktails went after Jewish people who were demonstrating to have the Israeli government do more about bringing home the hostages that are still being held by Hamas. And so I know, Alan, you have a phrase about what's going on in Israel. What's that phrase?
Well, yeah, this is the thing. Murdering Jews because they are Jews, which is what happened in Washington, and the attack on Jews because they're Jews, which happened in Boulder, that's anti-Semitic, and that must be denounced. But this is not a systematic campaign. What has happened is that the continued Israeli war on Gaza has really unleashed crazies all over the world. And it's scary because on one hand, you have a government that's being denounced by its own citizens as committing war crimes. And then on the other hand, you have people who are, I guess, mentally ill because they don't appear to be part of any organization or have any political real agenda.
We're going to have to dig
Scary.
into how to parse exactly that, and we're going to try to do that on this show as dispassionately as possible. Interestingly enough, a couple of things jumped out at me. The flamethrowing Boulder, Colorado attacker, 12 wounded, no one died in that one, fortunately, but basically he was caught up on the fact that he was not here legally because he was staying here on an expired tourist visa. But what jumped out at me was they rounded up all of his family. They rounded up all his family members and put them in detention. And I was a little shocked at that because when Timothy McVeigh bombed the Oklahoma federal building, I don't remember them scooping up Timothy McVeigh's family and putting them in detention. So now the question is, all the family members, one of whom was a high school graduate with honors, young lady, what's her name? Can't call up her name.
I don't think they've announced her name.
Yeah, I saw her name in an article.
You'd see her name.
My
Oh.
bad for not locking it in, and I'm not going to take the time to call it up. But she graduated with honors, and she wanted to go on to become a doctor to help save people's lives. But right now, she's in detention with the rest of her family, about to be deported without any due process, without any rights or. But anyway, to make a long story short, honor student may or may not be complicit in her dad's heinous crime, but I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Ray, don't you have to investigate people
Well,
and prove that they're complicit or collaborated before you?
there used to be a thing that's apparently no longer in existence called habeas corpus, and it does not mean that the president gets to do whatever the hell he wants, regardless of what's been said before, and that's gone out the window. As Alan said earlier, we were talking. This is right out of the Nazi playbook. You grab one, you grab the whole family. And we're going back to the Middle Ages. That's the way they used to do it. You commit a crime, you and your whole family get executed.
Collective punishment.
We don't have to, people are waiting around, we're going to do something when we start to lose our democracy. We have lost our democracy. It is gone. We're not losing it. We've lost it.
Look,
And that's another thing the press is not reporting. You're talking about they're not, well,
I'm glad you mentioned that's another thing the press is not reporting, because we're definitely going to go down that particular driver's lane, because one of the things about this young student that caught my eye was the fact that here she was, an honor student, may or may not have her life wrecked because of what her dad did, and will probably get deported the way this administration works. But there was another probably honor student, because she was the president of her MIT graduating class. And guess what? The headline on the New York Times was MIT class president not graduating, I'm paraphrasing, or denied access to graduation ceremony because of her pro-Palestinian speech, which basically said, MIT, you should be divesting from all your investments in Israel because they're committing, and this is a young lady's phrase, because they're committing genocide. You should not be supporting genocide. I'm quoting her. But because she said that, even though she was the class president, whatever that ceremony was before the actual graduation ceremony where she gave that speech, she was banned from participating in her. She couldn't walk, couldn't get her cap and gown with all the rest of her class, even though she was the class president. So now, Ray, to pick up on your point, the fact that the press has not been reporting on this thing properly gets to the heart of why I think this show should dig into that, in that the press has not been reporting properly on what the people in Israel have been saying about what their government has been doing in Gaza and how it's been prosecuting this war against the folks in Gaza, the Palestinians. And Alan, you've done the research. You've got stuff that you've made sure we're going to try to help you parse this so we can do it dispassionately. But I'm going from higher education to higher education. For me, MIT was Craven by doing what they did, but the higher education community in Israel have published and come out with a phenomenal statement that the higher education people in the United States of America should sit down, bow down, thank them, and emulate. Tell us about that, please.
Eric, can I just make two other very quick points on what you and Ray said? The first is they're going to deport the wife and the 5 children, expedited deporting. They're not deporting Mohammed Solomon. He's going on trial. If there was any evidence that that woman and those 5 children had committed any crime at all, they would not be deported. They would be put on trial. So they didn't do anything. That's the first thing.
That's a very good point.
The young woman at MIT did not support Hamas. She opposed the Israeli destruction of Gaza. And that's the distinction that we have to make. Opposing the Israeli discussion of Gaza does not make you pro-Hamas. And that's what those Israeli academics said. Let me just read a couple of sections from it.
Please do. I mean, it's powerful.
Right. Now, it was signed by 1,200 Israeli college university professors.
1,200. Wow.
1,200. As academics, we recognize our own role in these crimes. It is human societies, not governments, that commit crimes against humanity. Some do so by means of direct violence. Others do so by sanctioning the crimes and justifying them. We cannot claim that we did not know. We have been silent for too long. This is a horrifying litany of war crimes and even crimes against humanity. These are Israeli academics who can no longer tolerate what their government is doing, and they cannot remain silent, because to remain silent is to be complicitous.
Mm-hmm. And they are stating without equivocation that the Netanyahu government and the IDF are committing war crimes, and they acknowledge that they're doing it in their name. And they're saying, we do not want you doing this in our name. And that to me is powerful. But also, I read that litany of other individuals. The first name that jumped out at me was the former prime minister, uh,
Ehud Olmert.
Ehud Olmert, right? And he came out of the conservative Likud party, who were the far right party back in the day before this religious far, 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 far extreme right party became Netanyahu's governing driving force right now. And Omer actually, because of the op-ed piece that he wrote in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, is that
Correct.
Haaretz? Where he basically, in no uncertain terms, said the Netanyahu government was basically engaging in war crimes in the way they were now prosecuting the war in Gaza. And so the PBS NewsHour people invited him on their show last night. When this show airs, it'll be last Tuesday, whatever. But they basically asked him why he felt the need to come out and write that op-ed. And he said, because this has gotten totally out of hand. I'm paraphrasing now. But he said, we need to acknowledge the fact that this government actually is engaging in war crimes. And this is a former prime minister. Go ahead, Ray.
And if it's okay, go ahead, Ray.
It is. Okay, I'm sorry. I had to say that. That's what it is.
What?
Genocide.
Oh, okay. That's what you said. Bob, well, your explication.
No, I was just going to go to the document that Alan sent us a little bit earlier that included the quote that you went to, because it uses a word that I had used on a show earlier, just to describe what Israel was turning into. Former General Yair Golan, the leader of Israel's Liberal Alliance, stated in an interview with Israel Radio, quote, Israel is on the way to becoming and this is the word I use, a pariah state, like South Africa was, if we don't return to acting like a sane country. A sane country does not fight against civilians, does not kill babies as a hobby, and does not set itself the aim of expelling populations. So, yeah, we have this internal, these comments coming out internally in Israel that are not being fully covered. If I hadn't gotten that document from Alan, I wouldn't have known any of those quotes.
That's the former defense minister, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I remember on Media Watch a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, memory plays tricks, but when Netanyahu was under fire for all his shenanigans, whatever they were, and the Supreme Court was actually getting ready to lower the gavel on him, he launched his campaign to try to strip the Supreme Court of their power, and the people rose up en masse to make sure he knew they didn't like that plan. And those demonstrations and that reaction, we got all kinds of press coverage of that a year and a half ago in this country. There are still people, Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, demonstrating, and organizations going to the mat saying, stop doing this in our name. You are committing war crimes, etc. And we're not seeing any of that coverage anywhere that's happening against Netanyahu's prosecution of that war in Gaza. It's not showing up in the United States media anywhere, to my knowledge. Am I missing something, guys? Tell me. Raymond, what have you seen?
Not much. I mean, I read a lot of the British press because they tell me more about what's going on in my country and the world than the New York Times does. and that's a fact. But
Mhm.
yeah, no, in the United States press, not a heck of a lot. It's like there's this forbidden, it's a forbidden topic. You can't do it. Everybody's afraid. If I say anything about what's happening in Gaza, I'm going to be called an anti-Semite. And people are afraid of that politically for their political positions, financial reasons, what have you. We're, we're just, I hate to say it. I hate to say it. Sometimes America is a nation of sheep.
Yeah,
I mean, you might have something there, Ray, because we're in a country where Jeff Bezos can tell the editorial board what not to publish. That owner at the LA Times did the same thing with a endorsement. We have suits against major media coming out of the Trump administration, and they're all scared. They want to settle those lawsuits or just pay them off. And then we have NPR weakening and PBS weakening, voices which would have normally brought us more. Luckily, they still are. But yeah, we're seeing a weakening of the press in general. But yeah, the backbone isn't there where it should be to get to cover these stories inside Israel. Go ahead, Alan.
So just the Trump administration, their war on Harvard, which was, a classic American institution,
Mhm.
frightens people. And, it's like they're trying to bankrupt the leading American university. So what happens is to introduce this stuff is to open yourself up to attack. This is one interesting one. There's been very little attention to what's been going on in the West Bank because with Gaza. But
Mhm.
900 Palestinians have been killed on the West Bank by the Israeli military and settler gangs since the start of the war in Gaza. In April, a 14-year-old Palestinian American boy, a U.S. citizen who was born in New Jersey, was murdered by Israeli soldiers who claimed he was throwing rocks.
This is on
New
the
Jersey,
back.
New Jersey Senators Sandy Kim and Cory Booker are demanding an American-led investigation. This was an American kid from New Jersey. Trump administration has refused. There is virtually no coverage of this anywhere. And all that coverage of Boulder, Colorado, which was justified. How about this kid is an American citizen murdered by Israeli soldiers who accused him of throwing rocks. And U.S. senators have demanded an investigation, and the government says no.
Alan, when did that happen? Was that back in April sometime?
April 6th.
So I can tell you, not that my memory is like it used to be back in the day, but I don't remember anything crossing my inbox about a New Jersey, how old was he? 9-year-old?
No, he was 14.
14-year-old being killed in the West Bank by an Israeli soldier. Bob, you see anything in your inbox?
No, but I mean, we've talked about the press inside Israel and coverage inside Gaza. It's not easy to get coverage with this current Israeli government and the IDF. I'll just mention briefly, we have this rating, the Reporters Without Borders. I'm sorry, yes, Reporters Without Borders. They post a press freedom index for the world. And the US has dropped to number 57 behind like Liberia and whatnot. But Israel is number 112 behind Haiti. So when it comes to press coverage internally out there, they suppress it to the level that it's rated behind Haiti.
So we got two problems. We got lack of press freedom in Israel, stymieing getting as many of these stories out as possible. But even when the Israeli press, like Haaretz and other outlets, and the Israeli population do X, Y, and Z to push back against Netanyahu, there are Israeli bureaus from Western places like the New York Times and ABC News and all those folk who could and should be covering that stuff and letting the American people be fully aware of what's going on. And now, because, Alan, if you had not cobbled together a quick summary of things that have been going on over the last few months, not to mention the last couple of years, we who think we are actually monitoring some media stuff wouldn't have known anything about it. And that speaks to the fact that if people like us who actually do a kind of a job of scouring media to see what's important, what's not important, what's being covered, if we're not seeing it, that means the general public out here is not seeing any of this. And that's why we don't know what's going on in Gaza, West Bank, or any of that place, because our mainstream media folk are actually falling down on the job, despite censorship stuff. We're falling down on the job big time.
Let me give you the dates. The boy was killed on April 6th. The Times reported it on May 27th, but they reported it because Booker and Kim, the senators from New Jersey, were making a stink. But they didn't report it when he was murdered.
So we just found out about that in the press here like a week ago. 27th, that's just about a week. May 27th. Well, interestingly enough, one of my good friends, longtime friends, Israeli citizen, but actually has been in this country for quite some time. I didn't get her permission to use her name, but Ruth, her first name. Next time I'll ask her permission. We had a long conversation about what's been happening, and she is just like Omer and the defense minister and all that. She is very, very upset about how that war is being prosecuted and what's being done. And she's fearful for the soul of the country right now. She just thinks the country is self-destructing. I'm paraphrasing, but she says Omer is correct. The former defense minister is correct. And the Israeli people, there are a whole bunch of them who are not happy with what this guy Netanyahu is doing. And she thinks it's a war of convenience for him to make sure he stays out of whatever hot water he's in. He's going to continue to prosecute this war. So, but to segue back to where we are in this country, there were, besides the MIT student, there were a couple of other young people who protested at their graduations and, of course, have been silenced, or I believe, let me not call a name, but one student was actually told he was not going to get his credential for whatever protest he'd done. So, yeah, we are falling into the trap of bowing down to hard right, autocratic, whatever propaganda mills, whatever, what do we call it? Curtailment of free expression, ability, freedom of the press. I'm at a loss of words. Ray, pick up on what I'm not articulating properly. What are we losing here as far as freedoms?
You actually didn't miss anything. It's hard to put in the words though, because it's so abysmal. How do you describe it? I mean, the words that I would use would be inflammatory. I mean, the words that I would use would be inflammatory. I'm not saying it's inflammatory, but I'm embarrassed about the way the press is reporting world events. I'm more embarrassed the way they're not reporting about what is actually happening in this country. During the Orange guy's first term, the press spent the entire 4 years talking about his antics, his crazy hair, his malapropisms. and not getting down to the fact that this guy is dangerous. We can't let him get any further than this. But we did, because I think basically because the press fell down once again, or maybe that was the beginning. I don't know. I don't know when the press stopped paying attention and stopped reporting what's really going on in this country. But I bring it all back to that, because I don't think if Americans, the average Joe American, would put up with any of this if he really understood what is going on. We're decent people. We're not, we shouldn't be complacent in what's going on. And we are. We're lazy. America's gotten fat and lazy.
No, I agree with you, Ray. I've said this before. A lot of people in this country just aren't listening. They don't pay attention to the news. They
As
look
long
at
as they
social
get their
media.
latte at Starbucks, everything is fine.
Yeah. And with that, we have 1 minute and 45 seconds left.
Real quick about not listening or not interpreting properly. Tell us about that little accusation by the New York City Council person against one of the mayoral candidates.
Yes, Vicky Palladino, Republican out of Queens, uh, was commenting about a mayoral candidate, Zoran Mamdani, who's, I guess he's in the state assembly, I believe, who's running for mayor. And she said that because he hasn't been a citizen for 10 years, and she alleged that he's doing everything to undermine this country, and which she has no factual backup, and she's calling for him to be deported. This is just
Okay.
stupidity, fascism, whatever you want to call it. Deport somebody, and he's been in the country since he was 7.
Right.
So, there's no issue here about his loyalty. And with that, we have about 45 seconds left.
Man,
Both of his parents are professors at Columbia, which automatically makes him suspicious.
yeah, right. But the bottom line is the man had the sworn oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, when he became a naturalized citizen. And he did that of his own free will because he evidently loves the values that this country espouses. And with that, I'm going to give him a tip of the hat because I swore that oath myself when I became a dual citizen by being naturalized, even though I was born on the U.S. territory in possession and should have been a natural born citizen. And with that, this has been Media Watch, folks. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Raymond Peterson.
I'm Alan Singer.
And I'm Bob Anthony. Catch up to us on YouTube on Media Watch EVT.
And we'll catch you the next time, folks. Stay safe.